When people think about moving to the Portland area, they generally think about the city of Portland itself or the nearby suburbs, but this is what's waiting just 30 minutes south. Welcome to rural living here in the Portland metro area. We are here on the edge of Oregon wine country up on Parrot Mountain off of Ladd Hill. And today we're gonna do some exploring and talk a little bit about rural living and the rural lifestyle. So if you're looking for something a little bit different, maybe don't want that city lifestyle, maybe want a little bit more space than even the suburbs give you, we're gonna check this out a little bit, talk about what you can find here, some of the lifestyle aspects, some of the things to be aware of and that are gonna maybe be challenges that you may not be aware of and consider, and just kind of explore a little bit and check out some of those things and talk a little bit about some of those aspects that you want to consider before making a decision to have that rural lifestyle. So let's go exploring and we'll talk more about it. By the way, if you haven't been on this channel before, I'm Ben Nelson. I'm a local real estate agent here in the Portland metro and Oregon wine country. And on this channel, we definitely talk about neighborhoods, the market, we explore some communities, but we also touch on the lifestyle pieces and why this is such a great area to live, meet some really cool business owners and get to experience some pretty cool and unique things. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if you are considering moving to the area or just want to know more about the Portland metro and Oregon wine country. We're gonna do a little bit of exploring here in the rural areas, do a little bit of driving around, check out some of the things that you can expect to see here. We'll talk a little bit about what kind of properties that you're gonna expect to find in these areas, and talk a little bit about the lifestyles, the pros and cons for sure, as far as what you're gonna see for a difference in lifestyle, a difference in accessibility, a difference in the things that you're gonna have to do on a daily basis if you have this kind of lifestyle versus something in the city or the suburb. So follow me, let's go do some exploring. And we have our tag along again today. Cosmo's gonna join us for this tour as we drive around a little bit and check out some of the areas and parks. So you're gonna see her walking around a little bit and she's gonna join us for the fun today. So one of the things you can get here in the rural setting is definitely you can get some spectacular views. It's a little cloudy today, so kind of broken clouds here and there. So it's still a spectacular view. Can't see Mount Hood quite as well as you normally would. And so yeah, you can get some fantastic views from here, Mount Hood, the valley. Some of the spots you actually can get, 4 mountain views of, you can see Mount St. Helens, you can see Mount Adams, you can see Mount Jefferson. We can see just a little peek of it over there again, not today, but on a clear day, you can certainly see it. So spectacular views, great sunrises and sunsets. It is gonna depend on where you are, of course, because, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we're exploring a little bit, but every lot is a little bit different. Every piece of property is a little bit different. So, you can have a really great view in one spot and then turn a corner and, you could be in a totally different spot and maybe have, obstruction and have trees or something in the way, or, just the way that it slopes, you don't have quite that view. So definitely going to be case by case as far as, what you're looking for. If you want something a little flatter, if you want something that with a really great view, you can sometimes tell from, looking at a listing online or something like that, but a lot of times you have to go see the property, especially if you're looking for something really specific. So, but spectacular views here, you're definitely gonna find a lot of those. Okay, we are driving down Ladd Hill, and one of the things that, you definitely wanna consider if you're looking at rural living is the roads, and especially up on the mountains, it's it's not like city driving, right? And there's some positives to that. There's some things to consider and that are maybe negatives as well. So think about my teenage drivers didn't have to drive as much in the city, didn't have to learn that way, but we're talking side roads, windy roads with really no median, no extra room for error, right? So you got to stay in your lane. You got to be aware. You got curves you're going around a lot. So they're great drivers now, by the way. My one that drives, he's an excellent driver. So there's some benefits there. But some people don't like that kind of driving, right? They would much prefer the suburban driving, the stoplights, they don't mind the traffic. So certainly less traffic here, right? But you have those, curvy roadways. You have things, it's up and down. It's around corners. It's, not as much on Parrot Mountain, but more on Chehalem Mountain on the other side, kind of north of Newberg. You have, some pretty steep drops And that makes people nervous, right? And we get some snow up there in the winter, and it can get slippery during the rainy season. So, if that makes you uncomfortable, it's definitely gonna make a difference whether it even makes sense for you or kind of where you would want to be on the mountain or in these rural settings. So you may be able to find some that's, it's not, the roads aren't that bad. You don't have those big steep drop-offs, but you can still, find that space out in this rural area. So again, those are some of those things, kind of like, okay, I want it flat, or I want it a little sloped, or I want a view. It's going to be case by case. You're going to have to like find those spots where the roads are, not as windy, not as steep, just like you are going to have to do with some of those particulars with the lot itself. So obviously we're in rural Oregon wine country area here. And so what are you going to find? You're going to find obviously, vineyards and wineries, of course, right? Because you got lots of that going on here. But this is an ag area, right? So you've got, you've got horse ranches, and you've got, goat farms, and you have all these little hobby farms. You have hazelnuts are a big thing around here as well. So you have kind of a mix. You have, you'll have your hay fields and stuff too. And then, just some other random stuff kind of mixed in there. So you definitely have a lot of ag going on here, a lot of that farm aspect. But you also have, I'm driving right along the river here, so we are still in, the rural areas, but you have a lot of, high-end riverfront homes on this particular side over here. So you have some of that as well. You have, some of that river lifestyle. You're gonna have maybe a little bit smaller lot. It's definitely not your, ag farming lifestyle. So talking about lifestyle, which we'll get into that more a little bit here later, but definitely a different lifestyle, and that can be, you can find different variations of that out here in rural. You can find kind of that high-end lifestyle. You can find that riverfront. You can find the manicured yard. All of that stuff is available here, but you also definitely have, of course, the more farm lifestyle if you want the animals and the the farming aspect, and there's just a lot of variation there as far as what you might be able to find, and it's kind of all available out here, whichever side of that spectrum you fall on that you're looking for. All right, well, Cosmo and I decided to make a quick pit stop here at a park right on the edge of the river. So this is a really pretty small park, but I think just highlights here in rural Oregon wine country, and access to water at the river right behind us here, right across the street actually. I don't know if you can see it, but you have Shampooey State Park right on the other side, and a great park, disc golf, great place to go camping. We love going camping there, have some hiking and biking trails there, just a really neat spot. But you have a lot of this here too. Like, again, this is about lifestyle and access, and you have the scenery, you have access to water, and just wanted to kind of make this pit stop and show off the scenery a little bit, and that you have access to all of that stuff right here. Okay, so let's talk about some of the practical aspects of living out in the rural areas, and some of the questions that you get a lot when someone's considering moving to a rural part of the area, right? What about commute times? First of all, let's talk about that. So it's going to take a long time to get to shopping and to get into town and things like that. Well, of course, it's going to depend on where you're at. If you're out, like way out in rural County or something like that, very different story. But specifically right here, Parrot Mountain area, you're really in a pretty good spot to have access to a lot of those amenities and to be able to get into town easily for groceries and all of those things. You're about 10 to 15 minutes to either Wilsonville, Sherwood, or Newberg, or all three, just depending on where you are in this area. And so you have pretty easy access. Now, you're not obviously walking to the store, but you are not super far either. So you have pretty easy access to those nearby suburbs, to be able to do grocery shopping, going to town for dinner, any of those lifestyle things. If you want to have access to, that suburban lifestyle, but still have the space and some of the rural aspects of living as well. Now, what about commute to Portland? So if you want to live in rural Oregon wine country? Is it practical to live there and then commute to Portland? Now that's going to vary, depending on your opinion on that and what a reasonable commute time is, of course. But it's really not that bad, and it depends on what time of day and all of that stuff, of course, too. Sure, but you're probably 30 to 40 minutes to Portland, and depending on what part of Portland you're trying to get to. So it's really not that bad of a commute. And now, especially if you're moving from some of these larger cities with just tons of traffic congestion. Now, Portland traffic's not perfect by any means, but even on a bad traffic day, call it an hour, not too bad. It's definitely a possibility to, have this rural lifestyle and still commute to Portland for work, if that is something that you're looking at. Now, what about things like, cell service, internet, those things that you need to be able to get by day, right? Who can live without their data, right? We need that for our day-to-day living these days. So it's again going to depend on where you're at, but there is fairly reasonable cell service in most areas. There is fairly reasonable access to the internet services and things like that, but it's something that you're going to want to look at, because it certainly can be case by case and property by property. If there's a ton of trees, that's going to affect it. There can be little pockets with worse coverage than others. Now, that said, I've certainly found areas in town that have those issues with little pockets where it's like, forget trying to upload to Instagram or something like that, because it's just not happening, and you got to go to a different part of town to do it. So it's certainly not just a rural thing, but it is something to check, and to check with your local carrier, and see who's going to have the best options for you there. As far as internet, again, it's going to be case by case. You're going to have some spots where you're going to, fiber's pretty available in a lot of these areas, but some spots only have DSL. We only have DSL living out in the rural area, and it works for day-to-day things. It works for streaming. It works for getting on the internet and your social media and a lot of those things. But I am super excited because they have been working on putting fiber in, and it will no longer take me 5 or 6 hours to upload the raw footage of these videos to get it to editing, and that'll certainly help speed up that process. So I'm excited for that. It is definitely slow if you have DSL for those things. So fortunately, there are some other options if fiber is not available. You have Starlink and some of those things, if that's super important to you and fiber is not available. Now let's talk a little bit about what you're going to find here for price points and type of property and things like that. We touched on a few aspects of the different variations of what you're going to find in property, but we'll just kind of paint a broad brush stroke here. So you can maybe find that one-off property that's going to be under $1 million here in this area on some acreage. It's going to be smaller. It's going to be probably outdated, maybe both. There are some that are out there in that price range. Now, you might be looking for a while to be able to find that property if that's your budget, but it is out there. More realistically, you're going to be looking at things in the low million all the way up to several million, and there's just so many variables to that, right? You have the home size. You definitely have very large homes up in this area. You have some new construction. You have some estates, right? Some very large properties with lots of outbuildings and maybe multiple residences, things like that. I'll circle back to that part here in a second too. But you have that whole range. So you can certainly find stuff that's around $1 million, maybe slightly less if you are not super picky and you just are looking to get into the area and the home itself. You can add on to or update or whatever later. But more realistically, you're going to be $1 million, maybe $1.2 million, $1.5 million, kind of as your entry level, and then all the way up to 2.5, 3, even 4, depending on again all of those different variables, views and soil type and outbuildings and size of the home and, whatever else it may have, you can certainly get up there. And actually there's some, I think there's one on the river right now I think it's 8 or 9. So that's kind of a rarity to get up that high here, but obviously it's there. So now I mentioned a second ago about multiple residences on the property. So let's talk about that for a second, because multiple properties, multi-generational living is becoming, more and more prevalent. There's more and more need for it, more and more people looking to do that sort of thing. And actually on the state level, they recently passed, it's been a little while now, but some regulations that have allowed for accessory dwelling units on rural properties. Now, if you don't know what an accessory dwelling unit is, it's basically a secondary, dwelling unit on a piece of property it's going to have some more tight restrictions on what that can be. It's going to have to be smaller. It's going to have to be in a certain position on the property, typically, within a certain range or distance from the main home. So there are some tight parameters on that, but it is a possibility. So if you're looking for that, if you want that multi-generational living option, it's out there, again, with those restrictions on size and placement and that sort of thing. And then you definitely want to look at zoning, because zoning is going to play a part in that. It is not all rural zonings, it is most of them, but there are some particular zonings where it's, not yet allowed. It might be, at some point, but currently it is not. And then there's some kind of fine nuances too that are, maybe not something that you would think of, even within the zonings that it's allowed. So you definitely want to look and make sure that it's allowed, if that's your intent with the property. But it's certainly available, and so you're gonna start seeing more and more of that, where it's been really hard to find those multi-generational living options in rural settings. It's gonna become more available, and there's going to be more of it coming, which is great, I think. So it's to have to move into town for that multi-generational living option is a little bit of a bummer. I mean, a lot of people don't want to do that, or they have their rural lifestyle and they want to maybe move mom and dad up to the property. And there's some other options too, like if it's a hardship or something like that, and they need help or whatever, like there's temporary stuff you can do too. So it's certainly not just out of the question, but yeah, there's just a lot more flexible now to be able to do that and have that as an option. So I think that's a great thing. And I get calls a lot and have a lot of conversations, people looking for that ability to do that and have that multi-generational living available in a rural setting. By the way, another thing that you need to be aware of when you're driving on these roads is there are a lot of deer around here. So, you got to keep your eyes peeled. You should be a alert driver anyway, right? But certainly I've had a couple close calls. Fortunately, not any collisions. My wife had a very small one not too long ago. Fortunately, just kind of clipped the side of it. But it's something to be aware of. So curvy roads and potential deer running in front of you. You got some coyotes, so you're not letting your our little pup here is not let outside by herself, because we don't want her to be a snack for the coyote packs that are certainly right next to our property. So there are a few other things that you're not typically worried about running into a deer in your city or suburban setting. There are some coyotes that come into those areas, so but certainly more prevalent out here in the rural settings. So as I'm coming over the crest here, this is one of the large vineyards here up on the mountain, and you find quite a bit of this here. Obviously, again, Oregon wine country, so vineyards are very common. You're going to find a lot of that, and then you got your kind of rural tasting rooms and stuff as well. But it's certainly not the only thing here. Again, we talked about it earlier. There's hazelnuts, there's hay, there's horse farms. There's certainly a variety. And then you do have your properties that are literally just, they don't do anything as far as that's concerned. They just have their large property and, a manicured yard and maybe a nice, really, really nice outbuilding and things like that, which, yeah, hey, no problem with that. You got the space, you have the ability to do that. that's your choice. But again, kind of have both those options. You know, do you want to go full farmer mode, or do you want to just have a larger property with you know, more room to roam and some of those nice amenities and things like that? So whichever, whatever your speed is, either one works, and you've got the space to do it here. Okay, we're off of the road and the driving tour, and just wanted to give you kind of a snapshot of, you know, again, there's different variations of what rural living can be, but certainly one of them is the whole farm thing and the animals and all of that stuff. So, you know, you got your goats, you got your chickens. Hey, how you doing? Right? Your goats, you got your chickens, you have your fresh eggs in the morning that you can come down and get. So, you know, if you're looking for that hobby farm lifestyle, or, you know, just a little bit of room, and maybe my kids love animals, right? So barn cats and the dogs and the goats and the chickens, and it's just all, what else do we have? Bunny, right? So it's just all part of the experience of that rural living, and very, very hard to do in an urban setting, by the way. Although if you get into Portland, you know, or even some of the stuff, you know, you might see a goat in the backyard. You do see that every once in a while, so not in your HOAs though. So anyway, so this is just kind of a snapshot of what you can get. You know, you got your space, you have your animals, you can get out and, you know, interact with nature just right out your back door. And, you know, certainly a different kind of lifestyle. And again, you can certainly have rural living without that. You can have the manicured yard and just enjoy the views and not necessarily have the farm aspect. That is a possibility as well. So the rural lifestyle is definitely not for everybody. You know, it sounds like you know, a lot of people dream about that, and it can be a great thing, but certainly if you're looking to do that and looking at that as an option, you definitely want to look at the ups and the downs, the pros and the cons of rural versus suburban versus urban. Completely different lifestyles, obviously. So let's talk about some of the practical, you know, maybe pros and cons really quick here as we wrap up. You know, you definitely have more maintenance, right? So, you know, there's different variations of that depending on if you're in like an urban condo versus say a suburban single family home. You still have some maintenance in the suburban setting, but it's very different here. We're talking, you know, field mowing and having to have equipment or hire somebody to do that stuff for you. You add animals to the mix, and you have fencing to deal with, and you have, you know, feeding, and you have to make sure that they're, you know, they're taken care of and watched over and that sort of thing. And, you know, there's definitely positive sides to those things, of course, that, you know, you get to experience the animals, and we talked about the fresh eggs and all of those things. And I think animals are great for kids to interact with. And so I think it's a great setting to raise kids in a rural environment like this and have those animals and have them experience that and grow up in that. But again, everybody's looking for something a little bit different. You are definitely not, obviously, you know, this is not your walkable lifestyle. You're not walking to, you know, stores or, you know, shops or restaurants or anything like that. You're certainly driving from here into town to get any of those things. So certainly that to consider. Obviously, price points, another thing. You're going to be, you know, definitely above the market median to get into something like this in a rural setting. You're not going to be anywhere close to that, you know, $525 to $550 median price point for something like this. So your budget's got to meet where this is at, and as far as what's available and what to expect for price point. So again, it's certainly not your urban or suburban, you know, small lot lifestyle. You're going to have a lot more to consider as far as, you know, again, that maintenance and that time. And it does take time. It does take time to manage the land and to do, you know, those sorts of things. So you want to make sure it can fit in your time schedule to be able to do that stuff. But certainly, again, you have room for a garden, you have room for animals, you have room for a lot of those things that you can't do, you know, in those suburban settings. So there's certainly those trade-offs, and it's all just what makes sense for you and what you're looking for. But I want you to make sure that you're considering all of those things before you make a decision whether rural living is for you or not. So hopefully that was helpful to you. A little look into rural living, rural lifestyle here in Oregon wine country. You know, it's definitely not for everybody. There's a lot to consider. There are pluses and minuses of it for sure. So you definitely want to make sure you're weighing those things and making sure is this a practical lifestyle for you. Touched a little bit on price points. Again, certainly a lot of variety there, a lot of variation just depending on what you're getting. Yeah, hopefully that was helpful to you and you enjoyed our tour. We'll touch more on that sort of thing here in the future. Again, great option if you're looking for that space, that hobby farm, you know, having those animals, having that room to do, you know, some farming, large garden, all of that stuff. But certainly the you know, drawbacks, if you want to call them that, of the time investment to take care of all that stuff, and you know, you're not having that those amenities right next door to you. So that trade-off of commute time and that trade-off of, you know, accessibility to some of those amenities is certainly there as well. Thanks again for watching. Again, if you are looking for a home or searching in the area, I would love to chat with you, talk more with you about what it is you're looking for, whether you're moving from here locally or from out of the area. Would love to connect. Make sure you can either fill out the form below and I'll reach back out to you, or just give me a call or shoot me an email. Would love to connect, chat a little bit more about what you're looking to do, and see if I can help you get from where you are to where you're trying to go. Thanks so much for watching. We'll catch you next time.